Good job. 3, 2, 1. Let's go.
Welcome in Life in the Red podcast. We had a spirited half-hour discussion before we got started that would have made a great podcast. Now we're going to follow it up with an extremely mediocre podcast that we're actually recording.
We got to recreate some of that.
Damn it.
The reason why I wasn't recording for the last half hour was because of the vulgarity. So it's nice of you to swear twice in the first 30 seconds.
Well, the vulgarity was way worse before.
Well, that's true.
That's okay. It is 2:33 p.m. Wednesday, January 19th, 2022.
Damn it.
It's we got a lot of football talk. We're going to talk some hoops later on after the football. We'll dive right in with football as we normally do. Nebraska has its quarterbacks, Casey Thompson, the transfer from Texas, Chubba Purdy, the transfer from Florida State, both in the fold, both expected to be participants this spring. And that room, as Parker wrote earlier this week, looks a lot more interesting than it did a few weeks ago. So I'll kind of let you guys, again, you guys have kind of been the guys on this, and I'll let you kind of get into it. And what are your thoughts now that Chubba Purdy and Casey Thompson are both in?
Go ahead, Parker.
Yeah, it's super interesting. Casey Thompson obviously is the veteran, started 10 games at Texas last year. He's going into his 5th year. He's the same age as Adrian Martinez, was in the same high school class as Adrian Martinez. And so for that reason, and because he was obviously the first guy that Nebraska got out of the portal, I think there will be a lot of people who assume that he's going to win the starting job. He'll be, I guess, if you were putting odds on any of the guys, I think he'd clearly be the favorite. But it'll be really interesting to see what happens, in part because of Purdy, who they landed on Monday after he visited campus with his family. There's so many. I mean, we could do, a couple hours on how interesting the quarterback position is and the transfer portal and all of that. But it is very interesting that, Casey Thompson heard from Oklahoma during his recruiting process. Simple, you talked to his dad, Charles, who was an option quarterback at OU. And then Chubba Purdy visited Oklahoma and Nebraska before he made his decision. So it's there's all kinds of layers and sub layers and all of that to all of this. But the bottom line is Nebraska is going to have 5 scholarship quarterbacks in its winter conditioning now, and most importantly in spring ball when it starts at the end of February. And 3 out of the 5 are going to school at the University of Nebraska for the first time this week, with Casey Thompson, Chubba Purdy, and Richard Torres. So it's a new room, obviously, with the holdovers, Smothers and Harburg, who will try to win the starting job as well. And it's a new coach, Mark Whipple, and it's a new system, and there's a lot of new blood, and it's going to be a heck of a competition, honestly, like starting right now, and then obviously really kicking into gear when spring ball starts.
Yeah, Casey Thompson, Charles Thompson they've both made it clear that Nebraska made it clear that they're going after 2.
Yeah.
They were up front with both Chubba and Casey Thompson that we're taking 2, and that they laid out the situation, and they laid out a situation that played out for them perfectly. I mean, Nebraska comes out looking really good in this. The one thing about Casey, well, there's a lot to say about Casey. I guess I should start with what Charles said. I mean, a lot of the reason he's here is because of Mickey Joseph. Once again, Mickey Joseph paying off. But it was because of Mickey's relationship with Charles, which goes back to when Mickey was a quarterback in Louisiana in the 80s, an option quarterback, was recruited by Oklahoma, and Charles helped show him around the campus. Charles was at Oklahoma already as an option quarterback. And so they've known each other since then. And the way Charles presents it is, I didn't know this, but this is what he said. Charles says option quarterbacks kind of stick together. They kind of have their own little fraternity. If you're an option quarterback, you kind of stick together because they're kind of a rare breed. And you know what? Now that I'm talking about it, Charles and Mickey were very similar quarterbacks. Both option, both a little undersized, both super fast, both super shifty. So that all makes sense. Also, Kenny Wilhite was big in this. Kenny Wilhite played with Charles in the CFL. So Charles said, hey, when Nebraska called, it wasn't like they were totally on our radar screen, but then they jumped on it because I knew these guys. He says you kind of tend to take a call from guys that you know, right? Makes sense. And then he got to looking at it, Nebraska, the situation, started watching, their season, and it just made more and more sense. And then the Whipple piece crystallized. Charles does quarterback camps, and so he's heard a lot about Whipple. And Whipple was heavily involved. Talk to Casey every day that since Casey jumped in the portal on December 16th, Whipple's talked to him. So there's a lot of work that goes into this. So it's sort of interesting. And I would say Casey, if his thumb's okay, then he'll be the quarterback is what I would think. Right. I mean, they didn't bring him here to watch.
Right. But I think you leave open the possibility that whether it's, Chubba Purdy had a significant injury too. He broke his collarbone in camp before his true freshman season, ended up having multiple surgeries on it. He played a little bit as a true freshman, but it really took him until this fall for him to be back to being fully healthy too. There goes the 5-hour energy. So
you gotta have a big 5 hours by 8
yeah, there you go. Up until right at 7:40. Then you're off the clock.
Everything's gotta happen.
So it's super interesting. I mean, Purdy's a talented young guy, and then you also leave open the possibility that one of Nebraska's returning guys, Smothers and Harburg, both really young quarterbacks so far. Maybe one of them takes off under Whipple's tutelage as well. But yeah, Thompson is obviously the most experienced. He led the Big 12 in touchdown passes last year, even though he didn't start until week 3, and he was hampered by that thumb injury that you referenced, Sipple, basically over the second half of the season. He suffered that injury against Oklahoma in October, and then dealt with that, the rest of the way. So it's very interesting, and then just to add on, Mickey Joseph, maybe not the sole reason that Nebraska got Casey Thompson, but he was obviously part of the recruiting. So Mickey's been on the job for, a little more than a month, 6 weeks, I guess. And he had a hand in landing Casey Thompson. He got to Coldus Crawford, and he got Trey Palmer, the wide receiver transfer from LSU. So he's off to a pretty good start over his first 6 weeks.
Yeah, and hey, listen, guys, you don't hand the job to anybody, but Casey Thompson's 23 years old.
Yeah, 100%.
He's getting paid. Which is a very interesting conversation to me, by the way, like in terms of our role in critiquing players. It's a lot easier to critique a guy who's older than some NFL quarterbacks and who's actually making money,
Right.
I mean, that conversation's a little different now, right? Since he's living in a luxury apartment and making pretty good money here. So yeah.
The new day in college football, Sipple.
Yeah. You have to adjust your thinking a little bit.
Well, it's going to be, it is. I can't, certainly since I've been here, it was interesting in spring ball in 18 when Frost first got here and Adrian Martinez had just got to campus, and, you figured, you just didn't know if Adrian could really knock as a true 18-year-old true freshman who didn't play as a senior in high school. You didn't know for sure if he could surpass Tristan Gebbia and Patrick O'Brien. But remember, O'Brien left during spring ball, and then Adrian beat out Gebbia in preseason camp. But this is even, in its own way, this is going to be even more, almost maybe even more compelling than that, right? You've got. Yeah,
and by the way, how much? Ask it, Baz. I'll ask Baz this. How much of spring ball you think we're going to see this year?
A small amount, probably near zero, I would guess, until the spring game.
Yeah, and how many times do you think you'll actually watch a quarterback drop back and throw a ball to a receiver running a route? Probably.
It'll be a similar amount to the amount of spring ball we see this year.
And what do you think the spring game's going to look like?
Turn around and hand it off to all them big fancy running backs they brought in, I would imagine.
Or something.
They're gonna run all of the stuff that Nebraska ran this past year.
Yeah.
In hopes that Pat Fitzgerald and Northwestern watch them and say, well, They're a zone read team. That's what they showed in the spring game.
What if they did that? What if they like ran the Scott offense, the Scott Frost offense from last year, and like Casey Thompson and Chubba Purdy were both just like magicians with it. They're just like cruising up and down the field. Like it just looks awesome. They look like 2006 Oregon or whatever.
Oh, I don't know, but
maybe they can trick Northwestern into thinking they're an even front team instead of an odd front team.
I will say this though, if that's what Nebraska does, we don't see much practice and they're very vanilla in the spring game. Believe me, I totally understand. I mean,
Yeah.
that's the proper way to
Well, I mean, Frost, look, like Whipple had been hired for a week when we talked to them on signing day. They hadn't even, they'd been on the road, and then they went on the road. Frost was on the road recruiting. I mean, they'd met each other. They've watched a little bit of film, but they hadn't even started in true earnest the process of figuring out what the system was going to look like. And even then, on December 15th, Frost was like, I don't really want to talk about this much.
Yeah.
I mean, they're not going to talk about it at all. I mean, it's going to be
Probably not.
It's going to be like
we didn't see anything when Scott was running his own.
I know.
Like we're not going to see
even in year 4 or whatever. I mean, it's going to be like Fort Knox, you know.
Yeah. Locking it down.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
I want to shift gears. I want to hit Parker with this, Baz. That
Hit him
Avery
with it.
Johnson is interesting. There's a quarterback in Mays, Kansas, close to Wichita, named Avery Johnson that we should be familiar with, right, Parker?
Yeah. He's a dual threat quarterback in Kansas. So this is sort of shifting to 2023, which is a nice segue. Thanks, Sipple, into a brief, at least, conversation about recruiting.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's a 2023 quarterback in Kansas. Nebraska did not recruit him at all under Mario Verduzco, but they like him. They offered him last week, and I think it's probably safe to say he's maybe the lead guy on Nebraska's board now for 2023. It's going to be hard to get him, obviously. I mean, there's been schools that have been recruiting him for a long time, not only Kansas and Kansas State, but also, you know, Tennessee, I think, is in the mix, and there's
Oregon.
a bunch of other, Oregon and other schools too. So that's it's an interesting conversation though, because you just wonder, you know, Whipple, we've heard this already from Chubba Purdy, from Charles Thompson, you know, from Kenny Pickett as he's gone through. I mean, Mark Whipple has a pretty good reputation as a quarterback developer. And so it's going to be interesting to see if Nebraska can get into conversation, even though they're sort of late to the party for a guy like Avery Johnson. And oh, by the way, you know, the guy who was down in Kansas not only offered him, but also Dylan Edwards, who was a running back, Gatorade Player of the Year this year in Kansas, was Bill Bush. And Bush is no stranger to recruiting quarterbacks himself, you know, and scouting talent and all of that. And then, you know, so I'm sure he'll be involved in that recruitment too, along with Whipple, who obviously, you know, would coach a quarterback who comes to Nebraska. So super interesting there. I'm guessing they'll try to have Avery Johnson. You know, they've got a junior day on Friday this week, and then again next Friday. So the next 2 Fridays, Nebraska's got junior days on campus. I'm sure they'll try to get Avery Johnson in town. JJ Cole, who's a 6'6" quarterback in the 23 class from Iowa, is coming to the junior day. That's a week from Friday. That's the son of Jamie Cole, the kicking guru. And so Cole's Kicking, you've probably heard of. And so, yeah, it's very interesting. They're sort of, you know, they're sort of behind on 23 quarterback recruiting with the coaching change and all of that on the offensive side. But there's a couple of guys right in the area in Avery Johnson. And then I think you put JJ Cole in that conversation too, that are really good players and that fit. They're a little bit more of like, I guess what you would loosely call like Whipple style quarterbacks. And it'll be very interesting to see if they can get in the conversation for either of those guys.
It's interesting about Avery Johnson because he last played in the NBA in 2003, 2004. So, you know, it's very curious that they would allow a guy that was, you know, only listed at 5'10", 175 and played point guard, that he would now be a high level quarterback living in Mays, Kansas. So
yeah,
even
really
at 46 or however old he is, he ran for 1,100 yards last year in Mays, Kansas. So it's pretty impressive.
56. He's 56.
56. Okay. There you go. Oh,
he's
God, he's ancient.
He's older than Sipple.
56.
That's really funny.
He's basically dead.
Yeah, that's really good. Yeah. Here, yep. HR.
There it is. Call HR.
Yeah.
Call HR at our office right now. The office that we have.
Pass. Going into HR right now.
That's a whole other topic you don't want to get me started on. Let's keep going. Any other recruiting things you wanted to touch on there, Parker? You kind of covered things.
Yeah, just briefly. So even though, I mean, obviously classes started, the late registration deadline is next week for Nebraska. I think so. They lost a defensive tackle to Arizona State today, transfer guy. Not like he's leaving Nebraska, but they were recruiting him out of the portal. Nesta Jade Silvera from Miami. He's going to Arizona State. And then there's one more guy to keep an eye on. I don't know that Nebraska's offered him, but it's interesting timing. There's a defensive back from Northern Iowa named Omar Brown, I believe, who just went in the portal yesterday. Was an FCS All-American as a freshman in 2019, had another really good year and then got hurt this year. He's a safety. Nebraska needs a safety. He's right down the road. There's a lot of connections between the coaching staffs. It's one to watch, put it that way. And then
Omar Brown.
Yeah. And then the other one is Nebraska, even though they got Anthony Grant, we were talking about running back a little bit ago, even though they got Anthony Grant, the junior college transfer, and they've got Emmett Johnson, high school kid, signed already for this year. They got another running back coming to campus this week in a Jay Allen from Monroe, Louisiana, which is very interesting because he's a pretty darn good player as a 2022 high school running back. And he previously was committed to Brian Applewhite at TCU. So you can connect the dots there. He took a visit once Gary Patterson got fired there. He visited Mississippi State in December, but he did not sign a letter of intent in December. So he's still on the market, and he's visiting, just confirmed to me a little bit ago that he's visiting Nebraska. He's coming up here on Thursday night for an official visit. And so that's a guy that Brian Applewhite really liked at TCU. And I would imagine that probably interest has not waned from Brian Applewhite's point of view.
That's interesting. The Omar Brown thing's really something to watch because I don't know if I'm recruiting Omar Brown or if I'm Omar Brown, I'm looking at Nebraska and saying, there's a chance I could go in there and start at safety.
Yeah.
Miles Farmer is a guy that you look at for Nebraska and say he's probably got a pretty good shot to start. He has a lot of experience the last 2 seasons, Miles Farmer, but there's not a lot besides him. And if Omar Brown looks at that might be, I would look at it if I was a FCS All-American. I think he was an FCS sophomore All-American, but whatever. He had a good season.
Yeah. That'll be an interesting. That's an interesting one to watch for sure.
Speaking of new guys, I know Sip, you got to touch on this. Nebraska's going to have 17 new players on the roster for spring ball when spring practice officially gets underway. Into, I believe, February 28th is the first day of practice. Is that right? A lot of new faces. We've talked about the quarterbacks, but there's going to be new faces all over the place on that roster, whether it's receiver, offensive line, other side of the ball at some positions too. So a lot of new faces coming in. We talked about this being Fort Knox and not being able to watch practice, so we won't maybe get to see how these guys fit in, but there's going to be a lot of new guys here on campus already starting classes today or yesterday, I guess, and that are going to be on this roster. So it's going to be a new look. It's going to be a new look roster come the spring game.
Yeah, we'll get some glimpses. Trey Palmer will be around, Isaiah Garcia Castaneda. Those are 2 transfer portal receivers. Victor Jones is a true freshman. You'll get a look at Kevin Williams, who's a transfer portal O-lineman. Hunter Anthony's a transfer portal O-lineman. And Brian Buschini, the punter, is, these guys are gigantic. We've mentioned it before, but Nebraska's done a pretty good job of taking care of some needs, not all, but place kicker, punter, return man. Those are 3 big ones, and they got that. Trey Palmer's probably, a guy that they'll look at as a return man since he's proven in the SEC in that regard. So yeah, it is. There's been springs that we've covered where there's 10 or 12 new guys, and a few of those guys would figure into the mix. But I've never seen it like this, where there's 16, 17 guys, and you could point to legitimately 10 that could be in the mix or starting. It's very different. Now, it's not overly surprising if you go back to what Frost said in November. We're going in the portal. We're going to go heavy into the portal. That's how we're going to try to get this over the top. You know, Frost has been consistent in his message and he's delivered. So, you know, he said it. Remember, Parker? Baz, you were there too. Late in the season when he said that, it was sort of I thought it was a sort of an important day. He had kind of indicated it before, but he hammered it home pretty good. And this is exactly what they've done. They're going to try to get over the hump. And a lot of it's going to be with guys out of the portal.
Yeah. It's amazing what you just said, Sipple. I mean, so 3 receivers, 2 offensive linemen, you know, you're talking about mid-years, 3 receivers, 2 offensive linemen, 3 offensive linemen, but Justin Evans Jenkins is a, you know, super young kid, high school kid. So 2 quarterbacks, the junior college running back, Anthony Grant. And then not only that, but in the secondary, the mid-year guys, you've got the 2 junior college guys in Javier Morton and Deshaun Singleton. You've got Tommy Hill transferring from Arizona State and Jaden Gould, who is their highest rated high school player in the class.
Yep.
So, I mean, it's, you know, the competition, if you just look at running back, wide receiver, quarterback, and the secondary alone, and offensive line, I mean, it's major infusion of competition at several.
I didn't mention Tommy Hill. I mean, Tommy Hill could easily be a starting corner. I mean, he'll have to go earn it, not easily, but they brought him in to be a starter, I would imagine, right?
Yeah, he started a game last year at Arizona State, played in every game for the Sun Devils as a true freshman, and there's a job that's wide open. You know, Quentin Newsome he earned a black shirt last year. He was started all year. Braxton Clark worked himself into that conversation as the year went on. But yeah, I mean, I think you give probably the advantage to Quentin Newsome for one of the jobs. And then for the other one, you've got Tommy Hill, Javier Morton, Marquise Buford, Braxton Clark, you know,
Braxton
Gould, Braxton Clark, Jaden Gould. So
yes. Yeah. Geez. I mean, it is going to be quite a spring. It's great.
Good thing practice is going to be fully open to the media. I can't wait to watch.
Yeah, we'll be over there Monday, Wednesday,
second.
Friday every week, just hanging out, watching what's going
talking to Frost after every practice,
watching the boys move around,
watching the boys get loose out there.
It'd be awesome if Frost just reversed course completely and said spring practices are open, guys.
Yeah, just come on in.
It was like spring training where you could just go hang out around the batting cages for like 6 weeks.
I will tell you that when, well, this is sort of when they hired Bill Callahan, all spring practices were open completely. You could watch every minute of every spring practice. And I will tell you, it got to the point where I didn't even do it. I was just like, all right, I'm not going over there today. I've seen enough. But it was pretty interesting, but I don't foresee that happening here.
Yeah. I do not either. Should we move on to some hoops talk before we get out of here?
Yeah. There's definitely something to talk about. Yeah.
There are a couple of things to talk about. Nebraska basketball coming off the home loss to Indiana the other night, heading to Ohio State Saturday. They will play the Buckeyes for the second time after losing to them in overtime here in Lincoln a couple of weeks ago. But I think the more interesting thing right now, and you already kind of hinted at it, Sipple, is Colby Webster, graduate student at Nebraska, went on the radio here in town earlier this week and made some pretty interesting comments just about the Nebraska program, where they're at right now, what the kind of mood is, you know, behind the scenes. And before we get into all this, I want to make it clear, I'm not at practice every day. None of us are at practice every day, so we don't know what goes on behind the scenes. But Kobe, who's seen a lot of college basketball, basically said it, talked about lack of accountability player to player, talked about coaches maybe not holding players as accountable as they need to be, talked about players maybe worrying about their own personal agendas as opposed to worrying about team success. And it was eye-opening. And look, any of us that have watched that team this year can see that there are issues. There's no doubt. I mean, they're 0-8 in the Big Ten. They're 6-13 overall. Haven't beaten a power conference team yet this year. It's pretty clear there are issues there. But to hear a player, especially an experienced player, come out and say, you know, talking about, you know, how do you hold another teammate accountable if the coaches don't hold him accountable? talking about going and having to talk to guys about, we're losing because you're taking bad shots and you're not being held accountable for it. It was really eye-opening. I thought gave an interesting look into the kind of the inner workings of a program that's struggling right now. And I'm not exactly breaking any news by saying that, but it was interesting to hear, one of the athletes on the team come out and say that.
Yeah, it's probably interesting for Trev Alberts to hear this stuff.
I'm sure. Yeah.
Trev with Frost actively interviewed outgoing players, seniors that were leaving. He wanted to get a vibe, or he wanted to get information on Scott's program. So I don't say that. I mean, I guarantee Trev Alberts would be interested in those comments.
I think Fred's probably interested in those comments too.
Well, he should be. I mean,
he should be.
Yeah. And the first reaction is, wow. I mean, those are pretty damning. And that, Fred probably would be upset. But on the other hand, come on. I mean, if Fred's upset, you got to say to him, Fred, your record's your record. I mean, it's getting borderline ridiculous. It really is. I mean, they're staring down a barrel at 0-9 in the league, and 5-42 would be his Big Ten record.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't just keep explaining it away by, a lot of guys try. Say, yeah, well, he walked into a tough situation and there was a COVID year and whatever, but come on. I mean, this is getting ridiculous.
But the other part of the conversation too, right, is that it's almost, I don't know if it's more or less concerning, but it's interesting to hear a player intimate that talent is not the issue or not the main issue, right? I mean, one of the things I thought it was interesting that Kobe Webster said in that interview was he was asked if they play hard enough to win, and he thought about it and he said, well, I could understand why at this point it would look like that, but I really don't think that's the case. Like, and he was like, I really think if we just get one, it'll roll a little bit and all of that. And so to hear that confidence that, like, he really, even at 0-8 or whatever they are in the Big Ten, that he has this confidence that they could still get it turned around. I thought it was pretty clear to listen to it. I don't mean to put words in his mouth, and I would not do that. I just thought it was interesting to hear him essentially boil it down to he thinks they can win, but accountability is part of the reason why they haven't.
Yeah, and look, they're 0-8 in the Big Ten. You can make a pretty good argument that they could have 3 Big Ten wins, maybe 4. You
can,
and 4-4 and 10-9 looks a whole hell of a lot better than 6-13 and 0-8. I mean,
changes the conversation completely.
It completely changes the conversation. But again, your record is what your record is, right? And they haven't gotten over the hump in those close games. They haven't been able to close it out. And maybe some of that goes back to what Kobe was talking about, with the accountability, with guys needing to face consequences if they aren't getting things done that they need to get done in practice or in games or whatever it may be. So, yeah, I'm really, really interested. We'll talk to Fred on Friday before they head out to Columbus to play Ohio State. I'm really, really interested to see what that dynamic kind of looks like moving forward. Now that Trey McGowan's is back, Kobe could be a guy that sees his minutes get cut again. Let's not forget, he didn't play the first couple games, A, because he had a little bit of a back injury, but B is because Trey McGowan was playing a lot of minutes too. So that's part of this equation too. So what's that going to look like going forward? What kind of fight are they going to have on Saturday? What kind of fight are they going to have? Because after Saturday, they've got 4 of their next 5 at home. And the one road games at Michigan, who hasn't exactly lit the world on fire the last couple of weeks. You're kind of, not that any of them are easy, but you're kind of through your quote unquote hard stretch in the Big Ten after Saturday. And this back half of the schedule is going to give you some more opportunities. So look, Nebraska could get this thing going. And I think you and I agree on this simple. They're probably going to win a few games here down the stretch.
Yeah. Their schedule really was front loaded. It does ease up, not Saturday, and really not Wisconsin coming in will be really difficult.
Yes.
So it hasn't eased up yet, but it will. Yeah. It's just, here's the thing though, Baz. I mean, if they go to 0-9, if they go to 0-9 on Saturday and then 0-10, in Fred Hoiberg's position, you worry about losing them a little bit.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
But no, I'm with you. I see enough that leads me to believe that they can get 3 or 4 down the stretch. Now, I say that and people think I'm crazy. I get that a lot. Like, what are you talking about? I mean, nah, I see enough.
Yeah.
But they got to keep doing it. That's the thing.
Yeah.
You know?
Again, they've been in position to win probably three of them already. And you've still got 12 games left in the Big Ten. So that's, again, if Fred doesn't lose the guys, and like you said, the losses keep piling up, who knows where the psyche goes then. But it's look, for a team that's 6-13 and 0-8, they're pretty fascinating right now, just with everything that's kind of going on with some of the things Kobe said the other day. And look, Kobe's a guy who came back for another year, was probably knew his playing time was going to go down, but he came back thinking things were going to be different than this. He didn't come back to be 0-8 in the Big Ten on January 19th, you know, and so there's probably some frustration. Certainly there's some frustration there for Kobe, and certainly everybody in that program's frustrated with where they're at right now. So that's part of it too. But, you know, it was interesting to hear an older guy, a mature guy, a really, really smart dude. Like Kobe's one of those guys that's going to like be a really successful, you know, person, whatever he does, whether it's basketball or not. You can just tell that talking to him. But it was just interesting, I thought, to kind of hear him come out and say some of that stuff. And look, maybe it lights a fire under this team, and maybe it does get them going a little bit. And maybe that was his intent by doing it. And
yeah,
you know, so we'll see. But yeah, just really interesting to, again, we see it every time they play. We see the struggles. We see what happens, and it's no secret where the struggles are. But to hear a player verbalize it, I thought was pretty fascinating.
Yeah, the other part of this discussion is I think we kind of agree they could get a few wins down the stretch.
Yeah.
What does it mean though if Nebraska goes 4-16?
Yeah.
I mean, you don't want to set the bar so low that
Yes.
it's sort of making a mockery of the whole thing.
Yeah.
You know, but I don't know. It all comes back to this. Trev is probably going to have a sort of or just not sort of, just a difficult decision here.
Yeah.
Unless they go, listen, and I don't mind saying this, if they go 0-20, Baz, you got to fire. I mean,
Yeah. I mean,
there's no
yeah,
way
I
you can
agree.
bring back 0-20. Because
Yeah.
first of all, they're better than 0-20. Now, what does
Absolutely.
that mean? What does that mean? It doesn't mean that much, but you would be underachieving at an incredible level at that point.
Nebraska's never had a winless conference season in men's basketball. The program goes back to the 1880s, 1890s. So, yeah, look, everybody knows the numbers. Fred's 20-58 overall. He's 5-42 in the Big Ten. He's 6-52 against power conference teams. He's 1-27 on the road. He hasn't beaten a ranked team in his time here. So the numbers are what they are. And maybe the staff is upset about what Kobe said, but you got a pretty easy retort when you show them 20-58 and 5-20, 5-42. So yeah, we'll see what it looks like going forward. They're heading into a tough game on Saturday, but then you get home for a little bit, chance to get right. Who knows? Maybe they can rip off a couple here and pick off a couple pretty good teams. We'll see.
God, I'll tell you, if I were a coach and I'd look at Frost and I'd look at Fred, and what I've noticed is they're basically human piñatas at this point. Because all the criticism pretty much is warranted, you know, within reason.
Mm-hmm.
And there's really nothing they can say. Now, what I'm suggesting here is if I was a coach, I'd look at it and say, don't get in that position because it's terrible.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a horrible position to be in because Frost can't really say anything.
Yeah.
I mean, you can just trash him and there's nothing they can really say.
Yeah.
And you can second guess. It just opens the door for anybody to second guess every single thing too. That's
Exactly. And they do. And especially in this world now where there's avenues to do it publicly. And there's a ton of avenues to do it publicly. Nothing they can do, nothing you can say. I mean, it's not really debatable topics usually, or even if it is, you can always say, well, your record's your record.
Yeah.
It's just, Fred's in an awful situation.
Look, and Fred said the words, and Fred's basically said that the record's the record. It's a win or lose business. And he's right. He's right. And he's lost more than he's won at a pretty remarkable clip. So yeah, fascinating times for Nebraska basketball.
It is.
the only avenue. the only avenue for criticism of coaches at the University of Nebraska that I like to drive down and take a look around at is the column in the Lincoln Journal-Star. The only one I give any credence to.
That's right, baby.
Yeah,
That's
thank
right.
you.
Sipple laying it down.
Yeah, laying it down.
That's what you should call your column. Instead of first, you should call it laying it down with Steve Sipple.
I think that's Def Leppard, isn't it?
Laying down the law with Counselor Sipple.
Yeah. All right. On that note, we should probably get out of here. Appreciate you guys tuning in. We'll have certainly more next week around this time. And until then, we'll talk to you soon.